You may not know me, but you probably know somebody like me. A bright, capable, competent human being who can't seem to get anywhere on time. And it's not just me. Growing up, my family was always late, and not by a piddly few minutes. Minutes are for amateurs. We could be hours late without any clear reason for the delay. As I got older, I started to notice odd things about myself. I found it challenging to leave a task unfinished. If there were clothes to be folded, I had to fold them, even if doing so would make me late. Dishes in the sink? Yep, those puppies had to be cleaned, even if I needed to get out the door. I couldn't figure out why I couldn't manage to be on time. I'm not a neat freak by any stretch of the imagination, so it wasn't anything crazy like wanting things to be clean or organized. It wasn't a compulsion, but something in my brain, or my genetics, made it almost impossible for me to live by the clock. Last week, I had an astounding realization. My condition wasn't genetic. It was environmental. My inability to operate on clock time came from growing up on a farm. Let me take a moment to explain. Certain countries, like the United States, transitioned from an agriculturally based society to an industrialized one in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. During this period, there was a cultural shift from using nature and events to mark the passage of time to a more concrete form of measurement, the clock. Once industry took hold, we discovered time is money. Now, we're paid by the hour. We work a 9-to-5 job. Leaders show their dedication by staying late. The clock rules the day. But what happens in places where it doesn't? There are still pockets of the world filled with people whose lives are not measured in seconds, minutes, or hours. They are measured by sunlight, by weather, by seasons. Their lives, their actions, are measured by events. Time is more fluid in these cultures. This is not to give the impression that people who operate in a more event-based society are lazy or undisciplined. They just have a different sense of timing. They use natural rhythms to take breaks or determine where a task should end. When your livelihood is dependent on your crops or your livestock, you have different priorities. You can't leave a cow half-milked just because the clock says it's time to go home. In these cultures, life is tied to the rhythms of the environment. Sometimes, you can even set your watch by them. Which brings me back, well, to me, and growing up on a farm. My life at home was tied to events, to tasks, not to the hands of a clock. The horses were fed in the morning and the evening. Since we didn't have electricity in the barn, these tasks were tied to sunrise and sunset, whenever that happened to be. We cut hay based on the growing season and the weather, not a specific date or time. And we ate our family meals when the work was done, which depended on the time of year and whether my dad was working 2 jobs or 3. So my family's culture was based on the daily events of farm life and clashed with our society's culture, which was tied to a timepiece on the wall. Luckily, I had friends that developed an understanding of my family's quirks. They even assigned us our own time zone designator as a loving, if a bit exasperated, joke. So how does this relate to you? We live in an interconnected and interdependent world, but our experiences and our lifestyles influence how we operate inside it. Unfortunately, this can lead to cultural misunderstandings if we don't take the time to understand what makes people tick. The way that we accomplish tasks and our ability to meet particular timelines can have a lot to do with how we view time. Industrial and organizational psychologists have identified 2 distinct patterns of behavior commonly recognized in cultures who observe time differently. Take Take a moment to think about how your school day was organized as a kid. Did you have separate classes for math and English, or were they mixed together? Did they happen at the same time every day, or was there a significant variation? If your school was anything like mine, each activity was distinctly separate, and the lessons were designed to fit into a certain amount of time. This mode of time orientation is referred to as monochronic time, or M time. In M time cultures, people tend to feel more comfortable focusing on one activity or task at a time. They set deadlines and adhere to defined schedules. They value punctuality and view lateness as rude. Event time cultures, on the other hand, gravitate towards a polychronic or P-time approach. P-time cultures tend to prefer doing several things at once. They also place greater value on the completion of human transactions rather than keeping to schedules. It would be very rude to abruptly end a conversation with someone in a P-time culture simply because you were scheduled to go to a meeting. Guess which category the US military leans towards? Now, take a minute and close your eyes. Think about how you work best. Do you approach tasks in a linear fashion, or do you jump from project to project, spending a little time on each one based on inclination or inspiration? Do you think timeliness and the ability to see a single task through to its completion are important traits? These M-time and P-time labels were developed by American cross-cultural researcher Edward T. Hall in 1983. Do you think they still hold true in today's cultures? Anyone who's deployed to Iraq or Afghanistan has probably witnessed clashes between M-time and P-time cultures. It's quite easy to get frustrated when tasks aren't completed according to deadlines or schedules, and they're changed at last minute based on daily events. But we still need to be able to function with others despite cultural differences. This means we need to be able to shift between M-time and P-time approaches to determine which is the most beneficial to achieving our goals. There are times that a schedule cannot be flexible, when clock time is used to synchronize events down to the minute. In these cases, there is little room for error. However, there are times when individuals or groups may be more productive when less tightly controlled. Understanding clock time versus event time, or M time versus P time, doesn't mean that you have to change your life or your expectations. You just need to make sure the other person is not speaking analog while you're talking digital. When I joined the Army, Uncle Sam didn't care that I grew up on a farm. I had to find a balance between working within the natural rhythms I was used to and the requirements of the military. When I joined the Army, I learned to backwards plan. I learned to account for every minute. But doing this means that I don't have time to spare. I have horses to feed and tasks to finish in spaces that don't always line up with the time on a clock. You will hardly ever see me arrive somewhere early. I just don't have the time.